be very careful with overnight artificial intelligence experts.
Can an algorithm take your job?
Can a calculator take your job? You know, there's this joke that implementing SAP is like pouring concrete on your organization, right? So you cannot move anymore. Never ever read about AI or software or digital minions in popular press.
Hello, my name is Michał Krawczyk. Welcome to the new episode of Navigating SAP API Testing, the show where we talk about testing SAP integrations and also in general about simplifying SAP programs. Today we have a very special episode. There's a lot of information right now about artificial intelligence. There's a lot of noise about that. One of the important things in order to understand all of this noise is to make sure that the source where you're getting this information from is credible. Today I have a pleasure of hosting Professor Marek Kowalkiewicz, who is a professor at Queensland University of Technology, author of over 140 publications. And Marek, thank you for being here.
And thank you for having me.
So Marek, I know that you've published so many publications. Today we just want to concentrate on your last one, which is the economy of algorithms, AI, and the rise of digital minions. Maybe let me start and kick off with a question: what inspired you to write this book?
So this is a very special book for me. You've mentioned that I have written a lot of publications. Most of them are very academic, the type of publications that not a lot of people, either in business or outside of business, would read. With this book, The Economy of Algorithms, I wanted to reach out to people who do not normally read academic publications. So this is a book that is full of stories. This is a book that introduces very basic concepts of the world, the automated, the algorithmic, the artificial intelligence world around us. So really, I wanted to write a book that anyone, my neighbor, my kids' friends' parents could read. Anyone who has some curiosity, some interest about this fascinating new world around us.
I think that explains why it was also so easy for me to read.
Look, this is really interesting because when I was writing the book, I thought, well, there will be people like you, people like my academic colleagues who will find the book a bit superficial, right? That's what I thought. And I was okay with this because you were not my primary audience. But then I realized, and I heard from a lot of people that actually they still appreciate it.
Yeah.
So, even though you might know a lot about algorithms, you will still appreciate some of those stories and the perspectives, which I'm really happy to hear from people like you. So thank you.
Definitely, thank you. So Marek, you have a quite exciting past. So you've not only been working at the universities, you have a huge corporate career. Maybe if I put it like this, you've been working for an SAP. You're my SAP mentor colleague, a former SAP mentor. One of the things that I would like to maybe start the discussion is if you could maybe tell us the dimensions, how we should think that either algorithms or AI is going to help with SAP programs.
SAP in itself is a piece of software that is full of algorithms, right? It is, that in itself is a huge amount of code that runs all the operations in business, right? So first of all, this is one perspective that we should be taking. And in the book, as much as we're talking about the economy of algorithms, I talk about this concept of digital minions, right? Those the metaphor for algorithms where I try to convey a message that even though we use algorithms to automate a lot of activities in our world, in our work, in our lives, we should not be relying on them to to be fully autonomous, right? And every now and then we need to be checking in on them. So this is the first dimension, right? When we think about systems like SAP, we need to remember that while they're automating everything, they're not fully autonomous, right? And and I think we understand it. Really, we've had SAP systems for many decades now, and people understand that there's a huge need for humans to be overseeing the systems. But it's becoming even more important right now, when there is more and more of artificial intelligence algorithms that are being introduced into those systems. And as we both know, when we talk about artificial intelligence, this is a bit of a broader spectrum of different types of algorithms. And then there is a subset of it, which is generative artificial intelligence, Gen AI. And I strongly believe that we still don't fully understand how to use generative AI in enterprise scenarios. And that's this other dimension that we need to be thinking about. It's not just the autonomy dimension that I talked about before, but it's also this Gen AI dimension where whenever we use generative AI, we need to be asking ourselves, do we trust the outputs that those systems are producing? Are we using them in the right way? Do they deteriorate over time, and so on? So there's a lot of very new questions that wasn't even relevant prior to that emergence of Gen AI.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, maybe what you said is that SAP was always using different algorithms in order to run the software. But if I maybe use the metaphor, SAP in the past was one big minion that had a lot of those algorithms, but they were all working together. Right now, with the, let's say, maybe generative AI, we should start thinking more about distributed minions. So many minions helping us, so many algorithms helping us with different tasks. Is this how we should? Is this the first layer, that it's not only one system, one minion who will be helping us with everything, but there will be dozens, hundreds, or even more minions helping us with different things where we never even thought about? Is that the right?
Yes and no.
Okay.
and why yes and no? You're absolutely right. I think that perspective of a single entity versus now a world in which we have multiple collaborating entities. I 100% agree with this one. I think this is the shift from a centralized homogeneous system to more of an agentic ecosystems. Agentic as in software agents, right? So there are those agents collaborating, exchanging information, and so on. So this is happening with Gen AI as well. So this is where I agree. Where I said no is where I would be a bit careful in using that metaphor of a digital minion when talking to the SAP systems of the past. And I need to explain why. I use the term digital minions to convey the unpredictability of the behavior of those new systems. The SAP of 1980s, 1990s, early 21st century was very predictable. Single source of truth, very, very predictable, deterministic algorithms. What we're seeing right now, the moment we start introducing Gen AI, is we're introducing this world that is full of probabilistic outputs, perhaps some hallucinations, perhaps some outputs that are a bit surprising, a bit changing. And so this is where I'll say, okay, now there is this new world where, what used to be a very predictable one homogeneous entity is now an ecosystem with a lot of tiny entities around, and many of them are unpredictable.
Okay. So maybe if I would read it like this, in the past we used to have a very mature minion, which was actually behaving in the very predictable way. Right now we have a lot of those small minions, of those, let's say, children. Some of them will be very helpful, but we never know what is the final result. So we need to validate it somehow.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a really great way of explaining that. Now, this is not that one is better than the other, right? That opportunity to have multiple of those agents, those digital minions doing all sorts of things, that creates the unprecedented flexibility and agility for those who manage those systems. Now it's much easier to modify them. You know, we used to talk about service-oriented architecture, right? It's a bit like this, but now with slightly different systems inside those individual services.
And maybe if we make a little bit deeper dive. So usually in the SAP programs, we have people like functional consultants who are customizing SAP system. We have developers who are doing some sort of development on the system. We also have operations. We have project managers, project management office. Where do you think those different types of minions, those different types of algorithms would be maybe most helpful, but at the same time, where you see that they will not be used that much, maybe, or maybe the SAP companies, the SAP customers should not start replacing or adding those minions into which of those areas?
We should start by testing their applicability in every single of those areas. So first of all, it's a good assumption to make that there might be an applicability of digital minions in every single area that you're working. Having said that, they will typically not be helpful across every single task in this area, but they might be very helpful in some individual subtasks. If you're a software developer and perhaps you need to develop a new function and you're not sure where to start, it might be a digital minion that will inspire you to use a particular library, or perhaps approach a code in a specific way. Perhaps you're a junior software developer who just doesn't have enough experience, or maybe has to modify a piece of code and needs to understand that piece of code. There might be a digital minion that will help you as this junior software developer understand it. And likewise in other areas. Now, there's something even more important than just talking about all those areas. The challenge in what you described is the fact that those roles are very compartmentalized. And so those groups don't really understand one another. They don't communicate across their individual, pigeonholes. You could start using digital minions to start connecting those groups and say, hey, that software that you're writing at the moment, it actually aligns very well with this and that functional requirement, which you wouldn't otherwise recognize, right? So there could be an opportunity to tie everything together.
Okay, so maybe we will come back to this piece yet, but if I can make a step back, how should an SAP customer know where to start using those minions? I mean, you mentioned that probably there is an application everywhere, but where should we start? One of the common things that we see currently at SAP is that SAP is trying to provide, let's say, those algorithms, those digital minions, for specific functionalities. Should the companies try to and in most cases, or I would say in many cases, these are really complex tasks. How should the SAP companies look at it? Should we try and solve the most complex and challenging functionalities with those minions that maybe potentially we don't even understand what is the output and how to validate the output? Or should we try to maybe start with something really simple, but maybe something that can be easily validated, can be used by everyone? Are there any ways of working with introducing those digital minions?
Yes, absolutely. I have some very, very strong views in this space. I believe it's a bad idea to start by trying to introduce Gen AI, digital minions in very complex tasks. That's simply because there's a lot of risk involved in such an approach.
And can you give, Marek, can you give an example of a complex task? Is this like developing code, or what kind of complex tasks are we talking about in terms of SAP maybe landscapes?
So by a complex task, I would understand something that is more of a workflow, where a number of different actions need to happen in some form of a sequence or some form of a process. And so this could be perhaps a pretty complex approval process, right? You know, where a document needs to be created, sent to one party for an approval. Based on the output of that party, maybe changes need to be introduced, and then that would be sent to another party for approval, and so on, right? So a complex process in which a number of tasks is involved, and those tasks differ in what they are, right? So that would be a relatively complex task or a scenario. A simple one would be one where, I don't know, we just want to summarize a document, and turn it from 50 pages to 2 sentences, or perhaps analyze a customer and display a potential churn risk of that customer, right? Just based on the data available. So very kind of standard one type of an activity that needs to be automated. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. Maybe an example of the first one that you mentioned, the simple task would be could be when the functional consultants are getting a business description of what they need to do. Maybe it can be translated automatically into a technical specification, into a more functional specification, without just redoing everything and writing that from scratch.
Absolutely.
Because probably something like this can be done. But on the other hand, a complex task, so writing a piece of code, validating that, approving that, moving that to the production, as far as I understand, this is not something that you would recommend to start with, because the output is just too complex for, if I understand it correctly, it's too complex to validate. Right?
Absolutely. And so what could we do here, right? So you've already given one example of the sort of analysis of a document and turning into a technical specification, for instance, right? A very sort of, self-contained task. The other one, very complex, but you could still choose a digital minion to help you with one of those steps, right? And that's really the approach here. Why am I recommending that? That's because this is a new world for us, humans. We don't really know how to work with those digital minions, how to develop trust, how to oversee their outputs, and so on. So we need to keep those tasks to very, very small areas, so it's very easy for us to understand what's happening when something goes wrong, and so on and so on.
Okay, so Marek, if I can maybe add another metaphor to that. So is it like with SpaceX? So let's say that the goal is to go to Mars, but the goal needs to be established by having a solid foundation. So before going to Mars, we need to send many, probably hundreds or thousands of rockets to the orbit. And then when we feel comfortable with that, then we can engage on something more complex. Is that how we should understand working with digital algorithms also?
Absolutely. And it's exactly what Apollo program did in the 1960s, right? Each succeeding Apollo mission would just add a tiny bit more complexity to it until they landed on the moon, right? So this is a wonderful metaphor. Often when I talk with businesses, I talk about a sidecar approach. So a sidecar, like a car right next to a motorcycle. What I suggest those organizations to do is to run their business, their main engine, like that motorcycle, but on a side, experiment with digital minions. So initially, this might add some effort. Imagine some functional analyst who normally analyzes the documents by themselves or by himself or herself, and then they create technical specification. What I'm saying is, for the first period of time, keep doing it, but at the same time, use a digital minion to do the same work and just check whether what this digital minion is producing is something that you're comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
Once you develop that comfort, once you realize that this actually makes sense, this is where you can start shutting down your main engine and switching to the sidecar, right? So that's also the approach here.
Okay, so let's imagine I'm a developer. I'm doing those two things at the same time. So I'm writing my code, or maybe I'm a functional SAP functional consultant. I'm doing the customizing, but at the same time I'm using some sort of smart tips how to, for example, I can generate a new program, a new ABAP code. Maybe I can generate a new customizing. And all of a sudden, I see that I can do exactly the same work that I used to do maybe for within a span of 5 days. I can do it in 2 hours. The next chapter, one of the chapters in your book is called "Can an Algorithm Take Your Job?" How do we prevent people from going into this direction by securing them that actually they will not lose their job, maybe first of all, because this is the title of the chapter, and that they're comfortable with trying that.
Let me respond to it with another question. Can a calculator take your job? You know, there used to be time where people were making a living by calculating numbers.
Yeah.
And suddenly...
And what happened with those people, Marek?
Look, it was a long time ago, so they're probably still not around. But the point is, well, there was this shift, in the world. By the way, let's talk about it. Calculators used to be a name of a job. A primarily female job, for whatever reason. These were these wonderful women who were really good at calculating numbers. There were full rooms, full halls of calculators who would calculate numbers for other engineers to then work with. And yes, indeed, when mechanical calculators showed up, they were still there. Now, those human calculators were just faster, but also they did need, indeed, to start looking for new tasks, right? And look, if you are a person who can be replaced by an algorithm that writes code or so, indeed, this is a good moment to start thinking, where do I bring some additional value? And there's plenty of additional value that could be brought here. I can give you an example, right? So with automated code writing, right, generative AI that writes code, yes, indeed, you could pretty much spit out entire libraries, entire functions in a matter of minutes, right, if not seconds. But a lot of them, they will work, but they might not be very easy to maintain later on. So there still will be a job for a human, or at least for now, for some predictable future, to go through a code that has been generated by a machine and maybe clean it up, maybe annotate it, or maybe even 3 years later look into it and and try to fix any issues with that. So I think we'll still see that requirement for people who can work with outputs of those algorithms. But if your only skill at the moment is to write very, very simple functions of code, I would probably be going back to school now.
Marek, but is it really the case? I'm thinking. So you're saying that, okay, if I'm an ABAP developer, I'm writing a simple piece of code, but I'm working for a huge SAP customer organization. So let's say that right now, instead of spending maybe 5 days or maybe 2 days to write a piece of code, now I can do it in 1 hour. Very often with those really large SAP organizations, it changes nothing, because the approval the approval of my code so that my code can go to the next environment can only be done by a person who will approve it only on Fridays or maybe once a month. So are we looking even in the right direction when we're thinking, okay, those the let's say artificial intelligence or generative artificial intelligence will actually provide a lot of time savings for the developers and for the functional consultants, where the whole organizations are not agile. Does that make sense? Because I'm thinking that actually for those large organizations, if we start from the wrong place, nothing is going to change, because the procedures, it's a very common situation with agile developments, right? Everyone in the SAP world wants to be agile, but with the same processes and procedures that they use for the waterfall approach. Does that apply to algorithms, to this new AI digital minions also?
It does. It does. What you're describing is this sudden emergence of bottlenecks that we were not aware of before. Yeah. So before I go back to your specific example, let me tell you about a conversation I had with some academics who are in the space of new drug development. And we talked about exactly the use of artificial intelligence to predict possible new chemical compounds that could be very good candidates for new drugs. And they said, yes, Marek, that's actually correct, that now this discovery process can be sped up by 10, sometimes 100 times. But then once after this has happened, those new compounds have to be tested.
And for 5 to 7 years, probably.
And before that, we didn't know that there was a bottleneck there, because the first bottleneck was narrower than the next bottleneck. So there will always be that discovery of new bottlenecks. What you have described in this business that suddenly gets a new function that's much faster than the rest, it's a bit like putting a super powerful engine into your old clunky car, right?
Exactly.
The car just cannot go that fast, and if you try to push it to go that fast, it will fall apart. And that's a risk for businesses. So now we have two options here, right? One option is to try to curb that speed that we have gained in that particular area, or transform the entire organization to become agile and really benefit from it. And I guess you know which one I would prefer here, as someone who focuses on the opportunities of the digital age.
I think it's not only your preference, is what Buckminster Fuller used to say. You can only replace the old model not by changing that, but with introducing a new model that will be much better.
Correct.
So I'm just wondering, because Marek, we also discuss about a different topic, which is a bit related to no blame culture for large organizations. So I'm thinking very often the case with introducing any kind of innovations with large SAP customers, large SAP programs, is that many people who are working on those programs will only be there for 3, maybe 5 years, and then they will move on to something else. Within this time span, what we're trying to say is they should be comfortable by trying things that may actually fail, right? Is it even possible, Mark, from your perspective, to introduce those innovations to those really large SAP customers? Because we're talking about organizations that in most cases have at least 50, 100,000 people, 50,000 to 100,000 people. And I'm thinking, what do we do with all of those procedures that are there? How can those digital minions also help with this somehow, with this aspect?
Well, so what you described has been recognized as a massive problem by the late Professor Clayton Christensen, who coined the theme or the topic of innovator's dilemma. Those organizations that initially start as very innovative companies, but then as they grow, they focus on enshrining or just capturing who they are in a way that makes it very hard for them to reinvent themselves later on. So how do you approach that? First of all, you need to acknowledge that it's really hard. If you're a large organization, it's really hard for you to reinvent yourself. In my experience, and I've worked with a lot of organizations that are large, that are old, that realize they need to reinvent themselves, the only time when it really works is when two criteria are met. The first is the absolute commitment and sponsorship of the CEO of the organization. If there's no sponsorship of commitment of the CEO, no transformative initiatives will succeed. As simple as that. Second, those organizations need to be able to carve out a piece of the business and say, hey, this is where we're reinventing ourselves. And this carving out happens on a number of levels. It's a human resource level, so there needs to be a group of people who's tasked with that. That could be a customer level, so there will be customers who know that they're working with a slightly different version of the company that they used to work with. Data level, so separate databases and so on and so on. And often, even physical level, a new office, a completely separate floor for the organization. Pixar is a beautiful example of just that. If you've ever visited Pixar's offices in San Francisco, in California, just across the bay from San Francisco, they literally have two physical wings of the building, and each of those wings will only work on one movie at a time, and they will always sort of, once they're finished, then another movie will go there, because they have to continually reinvent what they're doing and so on. So that physical aspect is there.
Okay, so if I understand what you're saying, is that you're saying it's very difficult for those large organizations to be innovative, and I think we're also talking about some of the biggest technology companies out there, because it's also a problem for Amazon, for Facebook, for Google. Even though those companies have a lot of money, they seem to be very, very innovative. It's still a problem for them. You're saying that one approach is to dedicate a separate line of business or functionality where you can give it a try. I think a very popular approach is also to acquire a company, a small company that is already doing that, and maybe adjusting to the procedures of the small company, be it a startup, or in case of the SAP Customers, probably a local company which is using those new procedures in a completely different way. Because maybe this is the most standard way.
Absolutely, that's probably the accelerated way, right? If you, rather than trying to grow something organically, you try to bring in an external organization that might have already achieved what you're trying to achieve. And often this is the right way. Obviously, this comes with other challenges. I remember you did ask me, what would the role of digital minions be in this space? Look, frankly, I don't think digital minions can be very helpful here. I think digital minions are good at the sort of incremental improvements, introducing optimization and so on. There is one area where I've done some work with some colleagues, where we published this in Harvard Business Review, where we showed how you could use generative AI to help you with your strategic planning. So there's one particular area. If you as a CEO, or you as a CEO and the entire executive team, feel like you run out of ideas of how to transform your organization, I highly recommend playing with generative AI, feeding it with all the information about your business that makes sense for the process, and then simply asking, generate a large number of adjacent opportunities for our business. What it does is it expands the mindset of your executive team. It doesn't make any decisions. It's all about just making some suggestions that your executives can then filter through. So it's like a bicycle for your mind, as Steve Jobs would say, right? It's like your creative mind on steroids, right? You're using algorithmic supplements for your business model creativity.
Mm-hmm. And Marek, I would like to come back maybe to the question that I was also trying to ask at the beginning. Maybe if you would to say, where would the digital minions in the SAP world would be most beneficial? We touched this program that probably not in a very complex tasks which are made of multiple steps. On the other hand, does it make sense to start using it for the most repetitive but very, very simple things? Does it even make sense to use digital minions or those algorithms, those AI, generative AI, for example, driven algorithms for the simplest tasks? The reason why I'm looking at this is that when I used to work when I was on the SAP consulting side, one of the most time-consuming things was actually making sure that everyone is invited to a meeting, that everyone would validate the transports before going to the production. Everyone would reply to a mail in order to suggest something. So if you think about this, these are really, really simple things, but all related to some sort of bureaucracy, which it's a question. Is it possible that those digital minions will actually reduce the bureaucratic burden that the SAP projects have, instead of even thinking, okay, how much code are we going to generate? How much time are we going to save with, AI-driven customizing? Maybe we should start just with reducing this administrative bureaucratic burden. Is that also a way to look at it?
So yes, the short answer is everything bureaucratic should be automated. And everything that you just described could be automated. And so it should. Now, the longer answer is more complex because, and I write about it in the book where I say, automate relentlessly, but mindfully. So yes, we need to relentlessly automate whatever can be automated, but we also need to be mindful that sometimes there are activities in our organization that do not make sense. And the only reason we do them is because we have been doing them for so long. So this is an opportunity for us. When we automate activities, it is an opportunity for us to question whether those activities are required in the first place. So yes, but.
So there is a chance to eliminate a little bit of bureaucracy for the SAP programs, but we also need to understand what is it that we want to eliminate, because maybe we don't need it at all, if I understand correctly.
I'll tell you that what I'm very excited about is this world in which perhaps one day business process models will become irrelevant or not needed at all. So the only reason we have business process models these days is because we want to bring some structure into the mess of an organization that grows. As an organization grows, we cannot really trust that everything goes well. We cannot be a startup for the entire duration or lifetime of an organization. So we do process mining, and then we look into the insights, and based on that process mining of a startup or so, we create process models, all the best practices, and then we get everyone to follow them. But imagine a world in which we use digital minions that were trained on the way things were done in the past, and that agility and flexibility of a startup. And then those digital minions scaling, like process models, right? Instead of process model instances, now we have digital minion instances. And those digital minions advise people, advise employees of what the next right step could be. We could maintain this agility and flexibility at scale. Yes, occasionally there could be some mistakes, but this is sort of a question of a trade-off here, right? Do we want to become a very, an organization that runs by very strict rules? You know, there's this joke that implementing SAP is like pouring concrete on your organization, right? So you cannot move anymore. Do we want to be like that, you know, very efficient but very non-agile? Or do we want to maintain that agility at the cost of the fact that maybe sometimes every now and then a process will not go as it should?
How I understand it is that it's not only the processes that it's not only the software that will get changed, it's not only SAP that will get changed, it's also the processes within the companies. But maybe one of the biggest struggles, if I understand correctly what you said, is that for large SAP organizations, the biggest problem will actually be changing so many things at once, at the same time, because this revolution, this disruption has a potential of being really huge. But Marek, when we talk about all of those things, maybe you could share with us some of your thoughts. Where can an SAP people who are working with SAP, where can they find out a little bit more about AI, about all of those applications of algorithms? Not only from your book Economy of Algorithms, but is there a place where you look for this, so that the SAP consultants or the people who implement SAP are not that much biased by just SAP? They're not looking only from the SAP perspective. Do you have any places like this that you can recommend? Any learning materials? Any YouTube channels?
Well, so first of all, if you only go to SAP conferences, you will stay within a bubble, and well, you might learn some very interesting insights. You will not have the full spectrum of the learnings or of the insights. What I try to do myself, and I think this might apply to others as well, is I try to regularly go to conferences from very different industries, from where AI is being analyzed through very different perspectives, right? Whether it's an energy conference, whether it's a media conference, and so on. Funnily enough, the insights from an energy conference might apply very well to education, for instance, and so on, right? So we can learn a lot from other industries. Some other industries might have similar problems and they've solved them already. We're just not aware of it. So that's first.
So stay open-minded and attend non-SAP events also.
Go outside of your bubble.
Go outside of the bubble.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Second of all, those of you who have seen any of my presentations know that I spend a lot of time on Reddit. Reddit is this website where people just chat within specific channels about various topics. And I just occasionally type in things like automation, AI, and
no specific channels, just in general. You do a general search, like using like Google.
Correct. I do have some channels like or Reddits as they're called, so r/technology, r/AI, r/machine learning, r/futurism. I do check them out as well. But in the end, I just type in some search keywords every now and then and look what's new, what's recent. And there I find messages from people who deal with some specific aspects of AI or build something new. And there's always something interesting. Now, this is a very tricky task because you have to commit time to an activity that's a bit like looking for you don't know what.
Yeah.
Right? It's like an exploration in the search of something and you don't know what it is. As long as you're comfortable, this is, works very well in the evening when you're tired. Let me just, rather than doom scrolling, just have a look at Reddit. And every couple of weeks, I just find something that changes my ways of thinking about AI. So conferences, Reddit, and then
Marek,
news.
maybe let me also ask you this question, because what I like to do is I often like to inverse. What are the things where you would, as you mentioned already, what are the things where you would say, don't go there? This is not, like you've mentioned, don't go to a SAP conference only. This is not the place. You will easily find a relation. Once you know something, you will find a corresponding information in SAP. Where would you say, don't do this, don't go there? Some of your advice either for the materials or for doing AI in general. What are the don'ts? Don't do what?
Be very careful with overnight artificial intelligence experts. There's a lot of overnight artificial intelligence experts who talk about AI in anything these days, but it's very easy to find out just by looking at their history that often they just have no understanding of the technology behind what they're talking about. So avoid that. Whenever you're hearing from someone about AI, just check their background. Second thing, I never ever read about AI or software or digital minions in popular press,
Okay.
like
That's a good one.
daily magazines and so on, because those will be just full of hype and often misinformation. So yeah, avoid those.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Marek. So if you would like to find out a little bit more about the topics that we've covered today, then definitely Marek's latest book, The Economy of Algorithms, AI and the Rise of Digital Minions, is the place to go. And I would highly recommend it. It's a very funny, there's a lot of funny stories. So something that will be very easy for anyone to digest. And if you want to find out a little bit more about our episodes, please stay tuned for the next episode of Navigating SAP API Testing. Please follow us on LinkedIn, and we're hoping to get back with some more exciting guests. Thank you so much.